All right, Nico, can you say welcome to another episode of Healthy Births, Happy Babies?
It's a happy episode. Happy babies.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Healthy Births, Happy Babies. I'm Dr. Jay Warren, your host, and I'm also a prenatal and pediatric chiropractor here in San Diego at the CAP Wellness Center. And today we have a repeat guest. Amy Morin is back with us. She was on the podcast a number of years ago when her book, The 13 Things Mentally Strong Parents Don't Do, had come out. She had written the previous book was 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. Then she wrote the book for parents, and that's why I brought her on. You can visit that episode earlier on in the queue. And then after that, she wrote a book for women, 13 Things Mentally Strong Women Don't Do. And now she's written a book for kids, specifically working with kids, parents talking with them, but also kids to read themselves and skills. It's called 13 Things Strong Kids Do. So not only is it different that it's geared towards kids, but instead of talking about what not to do, we're talking about what to do. And she's going to lead us through all the different exercises and principles that she's put into this book. Amy herself is a psychotherapist. She's working in practice as well as doing all the writing that she's been doing with these books. She's a podcaster as well. And I'll have tons of links for you to join in wherever you want to join in with her. She first became very well known for her TEDx talk that was released back in 2015. To date, it's been seen over 16 million times, 16 million and a half, I think, this morning when I looked at it before we got on the interview. So with no further ado, I'm going to switch right over to our conversation so she can share these tips and tools and strategies as well as exercises that you can do with your kids, because at no time is strength and resilience more important for our kids right now, given all the stress that they're going through and all the stress that we're going through right now as on the planet. So let's switch over to that and let Amy share her wisdom. All right, Amy, welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you so much for having me on the show again.
Yeah, well, congratulations on your new launch. You have a new book that we're going to be talking about. And for those listeners that have listened to the previous episode, it was a while ago that you were on. We were talking about your 13 Things Mentally Strong Parents Don't Do book. And what we're going to be talking about today is you switch gears and now you're going to talk directly to the kids. So I know the parents that that are our listeners here are going to really enjoy and get a lot out of what you've put together for them. So first of all, I want to thank you, one, for being here, but two, for putting this work out for the kids. And I want to ask you, like, what inspired you to switch from, I mean, your first book was 13 Things Mentally Strong People Do, then you went to parents, and then you wrote your book about women, and now you're talking directly to the kids. Like, what inspired that change?
So the series has sort of evolved based on what my readers have asked for. So my first book was the 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. And readers kept saying, if only I'd learned this sooner. So that was why I wrote the parenting books, because I wanted parents to know how to be a coach. And then the women's book came out because I had so many women reaching out to me and saying, we see so many examples of toughness, but they're often men. We see Navy SEALs, we see elite athletes, we see sort of these historical figures that are men. What does it look like to be a strong woman? So that's why I wrote that book. And since then, I had so many more questions from readers about how to raise strong daughters and how to instill this in kids. Parents were like, okay, I'm a mental strength coach. I'm now teaching this to my kids, but they don't always listen to me. I want them to have some tools. And so we started writing this actually right about the time that the pandemic hit. Of course, thinking that the pandemic might be over before the book got released. Little did we know 1 year later when the book came out, we'd still be in the midst of this.
Right. And so I think it's completely appropriate to talk about these kind of things, about how our kids can be stronger, how they can be more resilient, because that's something I think me personally as a parent is something I want for my own kids, but it's something that all parents talk about, but especially this year, like these kids are so stressed and having such a difficult time. Like, what kind of things have you been hearing this past year that kids are going through that this book addresses?
I think initially a lot of parents underestimated how much kids were affected by this. I heard from so many parents who were saying things like, I would have loved to have been able to stay home when I was a kid and not have to go to school. And that might be the case. You know, I grew up in Maine and we enjoyed snow days, those unexpected days off every once in a while. But I think it started to sink in for parents how serious this was several weeks and months into the pandemic, as their kids weren't allowed to play sports, as their kids couldn't have play dates and they couldn't do a lot of their usual activities, and seeing that impact that it was having on them. And for adults who are trying to work from home too, realizing that sitting at home and staring at our screens all day is really tough to do. And to ask your 10-year-old to sit in front of their laptop and try to learn that way, especially after we've spent so many years telling kids to reduce their screen time. And now we're trying to convince them to sit in front of their computers. And so in the book, a lot of the exercises I talk about can definitely help with kids who are stressed out, who are sad and lonely, kids that are struggling with figuring out, who am I? If I'm not the star basketball player anymore, well, then what does that do to me? Or if I can't be the funny kid in school anymore, who am I, or how do I still do that at home? How do I still know who I am? And I think it's taking a bigger impact on not just how they see themselves this year, but sort of how they see the world. That this is such a strange place, even for us adults. We never really have gone through anything like this before. But for kids to know that life can change almost in an instant, and that there was so much uncertainty, and that even the adults couldn't give kids any confirmation on when are things going to change, and things change so fast, of between mask mandates and who you can see and how often you have to be home. And there weren't a lot of answers. So kids are really learning how to deal with a lot of uncomfortable emotions. So fortunately, I also see it as a major opportunity for us to use this as a teachable moment for kids to practice new coping strategies and to learn and grow from this too.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a pressure cooker this year for families being at home, trying to figure out like homeschooling or whatever version that is, and virtually, and at the same time being in a completely like stressful world, you know, with the uncertainty. And I know a lot of parents are just having a hard time navigating it themselves as an adult, with many more tools than their little ones, but are wanting to have something to be able to, like, as you said, like, all right, how do we teach them to come out of this stronger, more resilient, or even just, you know, in a survival sense, just get through it, but not having any real ways that's addressing children more so than just in a global sense. And how is the book set up? Like, I haven't seen a copy of it yet, because it's, at the time we're recording this, it's going to be published soon. But what age range would you say is it for?
So it's written for the 8 to 12-year-old market.
Okay. Yeah.
And every chapter has exercises that will help kids. Our subtitle is Think Big, Feel Good, and Act Brave. And so every chapter is dedicated to a healthy habit that kids can learn. And so that they'll grow up to not do the 13 things mentally strong people don't do. I want them to not do those things. So for instance, my first book about what mentally strong people don't do, chapter 1 is that they don't waste time feeling sorry for themselves. So the first chapter in my kids' book addresses that. How can strong kids not feel sorry for themselves? And then we break it down into there's stories and there's graphics. And then we break it down into real life exercises that are kid friendly and easy to do, and that parents can reinforce. So for example, a really simple exercise from my book is just about labeling your feelings. And as a therapist, I see how important this is. And there's tons of research behind it as well, that when kids can name their feelings, it takes a lot of the sting out of it. A kid who can say, I'm angry, will be less likely to show you how angry they feel by destroying property or kicking you in the shins. Instead, they have the words. And if we can just teach kids, how do you do that? And when they have the words to say, I'm sad, I'm anxious, I'm nervous, I'm worried, I'm scared, it helps their brains make more sense of what's going on, and they instantly feel a little bit better. And if you have a kid who's not going to be all that verbal and tell you it's exactly, gee, mom, I'm really disappointed today. You can even use a thermometer of 1 to 10 of how are you doing today? And a kid might be able to say, I'm a 3. And then you can work on, well, what would make you a 5? And we can come up with strategies that help kids, and it empowers them to be able to do it on their own, so that when mom or dad aren't right there, that they then have the skills and tools that they need to do it themselves. Because one of the things we're finding is when we interview college age students and we say, are you prepared for school? 90% of them say they were academically prepared, but not socially and emotionally prepared, that they didn't have the skills that they need to deal with disappointment and loneliness and frustration. So it's super important that we start teaching them these skills now, because what good does it do us if we're raising kids who are really good at math if they can't handle frustration, or that they're really good in science, but they don't know what to do when they're sad and lonely?
Right. Well, and I think that's such a great parenting tool as well, like being able to talk about different feelings, because I know a lot of parents will, if a kid's exhibiting some like quote negative behaviors or they're freaking out about something, parents will like tell them what they're feeling, which then can breed more frustration of like, wow, I can tell you're really angry. It's like, I'm not angry, I'm sad, but it shows up in a way. So instead of being told what they're feeling, they're exploring their own emotional environment so they can become more adept in that.
Yes. And another thing that as parents we often do in an attempt to make kids feel better is we minimize what they're going through or tell them that their feelings are wrong. So when you have a kid who says, I'm really nervous about that test, we say, oh, honey, don't worry about that, or you'll do fine. Well, that's not helpful. They're worried and they want us to acknowledge, I feel really scared right now. Right. It's much better off if we can just validate how they're feeling and to be able to say, I understand you're really worried about this test. Right. And then that opens the door to keep talking. Unfortunately, we send that message too often that for some reason that what they're feeling or what they're going through isn't valid, or we minimize it to the point that kids think I shouldn't be feeling this way, or mom or dad could never understand how I'm feeling or what I'm going through.
Right. And I'm sure it's coming from a place of like wanting to help and to make it all better. But what a kid might be internalizing is like, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this, so something's wrong with me that I am feeling this.
Yes. And so another exercise I talk about in the book is about how to recognize if your feelings are a friend or an enemy. And even adults benefit from this. It's one I've used in my therapy office with grownups too, because there's so much out there about feelings being either positive or negative. We say that happiness is a positive emotion and sadness is a negative one, or anger is a negative emotion. But the truth is, a feeling can be positive or negative, any feeling. And it's really about how it affects us. So let's take excitement, for example. Most people would say excitement is a positive emotion. Well, that's why people fall prey to get rich quick schemes, even really smart people sometimes. They're so excited about the possibility of getting rich that they underestimate what a risk it is that they're taking. And that's why we see people make silly decisions like that sometimes, because their excitement or their happiness actually got in the way. And then when we talk about things like anger, if we didn't get angry about anything, we'd probably never have the courage to promote social change. We would just stay stuck with whatever we have. We wouldn't speak up for people. Or when we're sad, it's okay to be sad when you're grieving something that you've lost. Sad feelings can help you honor it. But on the other hand, if you're so sad you can't come out of your room, you don't get off the couch, then it becomes an enemy. So it's just about teaching kids to recognize on their own, is this emotion a friend or an enemy right now? And then we need to give them the skills so that when it's an enemy, it's not serving them well, that they can calm themselves down, they can cheer themselves up, they can do something that might shift their emotional state so that they can feel a little bit better.
Right. And feel like they have like control and that they're like have power around it, right?
Exactly. Because as parents, it's so tempting to just cheer your kids up. They don't make the basketball team. We're all, let's go out for ice cream.
Yeah.
In a way to cheer them up. But we don't really talk about, gee, when you're sad because it's okay to be sad that you didn't make the team, or it's okay to be disappointed, or that your feelings are hurt. And then help them work through those things in a healthy way. And they might be able to realize, yeah, going out and doing something fun makes me feel a little bit better. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we just want to make sure that we're giving them those skills and we're not doing it all on our own.
Right. So they can become like more balanced within and allow those emotions to run and to move within them rather than being stuck in it. Right.
Yeah, that's it exactly. For kids to realize that they have some control over how they feel. They don't need to be happy all the time. I think that's one of those really unhealthy messages we send too, is that somehow you should be happy all the time. If you're not, there's something wrong with you. That it's okay to not be happy. We have to take the good with the bad, and the uncomfortable emotions really help you appreciate those good emotions like being happy. But on the other hand, we just want to make sure kids know when you're stuck, when your emotions aren't serving you well, you have choices in the way that you respond to them.
Right. And I'm sure like with these kind of tools, it opens up a dialogue where the parents can then become resources and helpers and confidants and part of the team, rather than it being like a punishment is coming if I behave in a certain way. And I mean, I know that's for me as a dad. Like I want my son to be able to come to me with problems to help them work them out. Whether or not I have an answer for them is another thing, but at least they feel like they can come to me, rather than, as you were saying, like, all right, it's a negative emotion, so dad doesn't deal well with that, so I'm not going to talk to him about it. And they feel even more isolated.
Exactly. That's so important for kids to know that. And another issue is sometimes parents feel really bad when their kids don't come to them. If their kid goes to an aunt or an uncle or a coach or somebody else, but that's okay too. That's one of the exercises in my book. I encourage parents and their kids to come up with maybe 5 trusted adults that your kid can talk to, because maybe they're comfortable going to their coach to talk about an issue that they don't want to talk to you about. That's okay. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with your relationship, but that we just want to make sure that kids know it's okay to talk to certain people about some of their problems.
Right.
I see so many parents that are worried that it's shameful if their kid approaches a teacher with one of their problems, or that it would be awful if they called someone else, or parents get jealous and they get sad because their kids talk to their friends' parents, but they don't talk to them. But that's part of normal growing up. You don't necessarily want to tell your parents everything all the time.
Right.
You just want to make sure your kids have other healthy people to talk to.
Yeah.
But if you keep that door of communication open, you encourage them, you let them know it's okay to make mistakes, that you're not going to get severely punished when you do mess up, but we can have conversations about it. Kids usually feel so much more comfortable coming to mom and dad about those problems.
Yeah. And that's a big thing you just touched on, was about making mistakes. I mean, that's something that it all too often can be viewed as like mistakes are wrong. And, as an adult and doing a lot of self-work or work on myself, like you realize, all right, from these mistakes, I learned a lot and they were good things. And that's something as adults, we, can switch gears into, but kids, like, that's hard for them to take on because they're being graded on things, or if they make a mistake, it's a bad play and they get cut from the team or something like that. How do you help them address that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I have a whole chapter in the book about owning your mistakes. Because we see that kids, they're so tempted to hide them, because, gee, if I make a mistake, I get in trouble. So I'll just sweep this under the rug. I'll lie and say I didn't have homework tonight because I don't know how to do it, or I forgot to bring it home. And we want to teach kids how to take responsibility for it. And part of that as parents is to make sure that we're helping kids recover from their mistakes and teaching them, let them face natural consequences sometimes, instead of just handing out punishments for everything or propping them up and making sure they don't make a mistake.
Right.
And, we find, like, in studies, that parents who instill harsh discipline raise kids to be really good liars, because their kids don't dare say, yeah, I messed up. Instead, they're going to lie. They're going to blame everything on everyone else and come up with 101 excuses because they don't want to get in big trouble. So if we can just send them the message, yes, there's consequences for the mistakes that you make, but you don't have to be punished severely for it. Instead, let's learn and grow from it. And how do you move forward in a healthy way? Makes such a big difference.
Well, and kind of going back, I don't know if this is part of that study you're talking about with the college age students, but I've read a number of accounts about like college students just not being able to fail in anything, in that their parents have always kind of picked up the mess and pushed them through. And they're like, well, what do you mean? Like, I failed the test. Like, can I just retake it? That's what I've always ever done, or something like that. And I think that's a part of parents' job, is to kind of let them fail and let them make mistakes. And if they forget their homework, then have that, as you said, a natural consequence. It's really hard to do when you're so used to taking care of everything for them, though.
Yeah, and I can say this from firsthand experience. I teach college classes, and every semester, never fail, they'll reach a point in the semester where it's impossible for a student to pass. They have like a 12 and we're, 14 weeks into the semester. It's obvious that no matter what, they can't pass. So I'll sit them down and we'll have a conversation, and I'll say something like, If you'd like to continue coming to the last few classes for your own enrichment, feel free. But I just want to make it abundantly clear, even if you got 100 on everything from here on out, there is no way, shape, or form that you're going to pass. And they'll show up at the next class and they'll hand in their homework every single time this has happened. And I'll say something like, this is great. I just want to make sure you really heard our conversation. And they'll look at me like I have two heads. Like, what do you mean I can't pass this class? And it's almost like they just don't believe that they're going to fail. Even, if you start doing your homework 14 weeks into the 16-week class, you're not going to pass. But it's almost like they don't believe me when I give them that, or they think it's just a warning. And because I'm positive that many of those kids have never failed anything in their life because they were given so many chances to redo work, to have a second chance on everything that they've ever done, that when I don't give them that many second chances, they don't even believe it when I say it to them straight to their face. So it is important that we let kids fail and that we teach them that failure is not the end of the world. And in the book, I even talk about how important it is for kids to study failures. In science classes, we looked at what happens when we talk about really famous scientists. We talk about Einstein and Edison and all their inventions and all the great things they did. Well, students' test grades go down. But then when they start to talk about how many of Edison's inventions didn't work and how many theories Einstein developed that actually weren't helpful, the students' grades go back up. So when we talk about famous people, if we talk about how many times those famous people succeeded, we tend to think it's a success story and that person was just a genius. But when we talk about how many times those people failed, it seems to give kids the courage to say, failure is not a sign that I'm a failure. It means I'm trying. And one of these times, maybe it will work out. And they tend to try more. They're willing to guess and put in more time and effort and energy trying to figure things out.
Right. And that's a big challenge about, kids trying things once and not being able to do it and then saying like, I can't do it. And they'll just stop, which, I mean, if it's something where writing letters, like, all right, we got to put in some time, like learn how to write letters and improve your writing or reading or later on in school and the like. But that's something like that environment, I think, in teaching kids about all these famous people and the quote successful people, how many times they have failed. Like I hadn't thought about in that is a modeling of that failure is okay.
Right. It's just fascinating just to send that message to kids that successful people usually do fail along the way. And suddenly that gives them the courage to know, all right, I can fail too.
That's so important. And part of your book too, you talk about like balancing like social time and alone time, where we got a lot more alone time going on right now. Maybe not alone time, but just not as social a time. How do you recommend and what's the value in that you see, like not just being around people all the time, but having alone time as well?
Yeah. When I wrote the book before the pandemic, my concern is that kids are so busy.
Yeah.
So busy rushing from activity to activity, from seeing friends to soccer practice to band practice, that they just never spend any time alone with their thoughts. And it's something I run into with adults too, that we're so bombarded with, social media and there's always noise in the background that we never just take a few minutes to be by ourselves. And when we do, we think we're not productive. This is a waste of time. And so I really want to make sure that kids know it's okay to be by yourself. You can enjoy your own company. You can be comfortable in your own skin. And of course, on the other hand, we see kids who are on the end of the spectrum where they are just really socially anxious. And for those kids to know that's okay to be socially anxious, but it's really important to be around your peers. And of course, parents right now are seeing that struggle of how do I balance my child's mental health with their physical health. I want them to go out and do things, but it's maybe not safe for everybody, for my kid to be out there doing stuff. So how do I find that balance? And that, Zoom meetings between kids are great, but they're not a substitute for hanging out in person.
Right.
And I think we're going to see, as society keeps opening up more, I think we're going to see more and more anxiety from kids who are now like, I've been home for a whole year. How do I do this? Or I haven't been doing much other than sitting at my desk at school. We haven't been able to play at recess. How do I go about doing this? So I think, again, it's just a great time for parents to coach their kids on how do you manage all of those feelings that are likely to crop up.
Right. I'm so glad you said that because I think the pervasive feeling is like, oh my gosh, once we're able to open up more, it's going to be just a happy free for all because you get to do all the things they haven't been able to do. But, I myself too hadn't really thought of like how anxiety provoking that could be for some kids. And to have that kind of heads up as a parent that if those kind of things do start coming as in these next couple months, like God willing, that everything is opening up more, that could be really stressful for a kid. I hadn't thought of it in that way.
Yeah, I'm hearing from some kids who are just really overwhelmed with
Mm.
things that they used to be able to do all the time, going into stores or
Yeah.
being on a team, being in crowds, those sorts of things. That the kids that are starting to do some of that now are struggling. They're feeling overwhelmed. They're exhausted when they get home. And for parents to know that that's part of the process, and that again, it's a great teachable moment and opportunities to help them learn and practice coping skills while we move forward.
So good. So good. Well, so in our closing moments now, like where at the time of recording this, the book hasn't been published or out yet, but by the time people have heard this, where can people get it if they're interested?
So it will be available pretty much anywhere books are sold, and Amazon and Target.com and hopefully every bookstore. But my website's another great resource, which is Amy Morin, LCSW, as in licensed clinical social worker.com.
Good. And I wanted to also mention like your podcast, which I've been listening to more in the last couple of weeks. I appreciate the things that you've done, but you've also rebranded that. So, and that's looking at like mental strength and resilience. What's the new name of that?
So the new name, it started out as Mentally Strong People, but I have since become the editor-in-chief of Very Well Mind, which is a wonderful website for anybody
Very
looking
Well
for
Mind. Okay.
info on mental health. But we partnered on the podcast. So now we have the Very Well Mind podcast.
Is it going to be the same format where you're doing like interview at the beginning of the week and then helpful tip at the end of the week, or are you switching that as well?
That will stay the same. So Monday we interview inspirational guests and get their mental strength tips. And on Fridays, I share my favorite mental strength tips.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Amy, for coming back. Congratulations on yet another book. I can't wait to read it. And thank you for sharing your time and your expertise here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And don't forget, I have 2 free offers for both moms and dads. First, for the moms, I have my 40 ways of connecting with your baby during pregnancy that you can get on my website at drjwarren.com/40ways. That's 40 ways. And for the dads, I have the 9 myths about becoming a dad that is also available on my site at drjwarren.com/9 myths. That's the number 9 myths. So both moms and dads are covered. Go check them out. I hope you enjoy them.